everyone. Welcome back to Anchor Taiwan's Women in Venture Roundtable. This is Elisa Chiu. I am the founder and CEO of Anchor Taiwan and also your host today. Tonight, we're having our 13th session. It has been extremely fulfilling and humbling to come all the way from our very first session 2 years ago to connect now over 100 women investors, mostly based in Taiwan and increasingly from neighboring countries and other parts of the world. We regularly invite global investors to share their stories and connect with the investment community in Taiwan. Previously, we have hosted many incredible investors from Y Combinator, Foundation Capital, Gobi Partners, Felicis Ventures, and many, many more. You can find the recordings and articles about them on Anchor Taiwan's YouTube channels or social media. Tonight, I am extremely excited to welcome Joan Yao, Vice President at Kickstart Ventures, the CVC arm of Globe Telecom. Before we start, I would like to take a moment to thank SEMI, 国际半导体产业协会, for being a supporter for this series this year. If you haven't heard of SEMI, it's the best gateway to get into anything semiconductor related, from the latest technologies, investment opportunities, suppliers, talent, and cross-border collaboration. They have more than 2,400 member companies and connect 1.3 million professionals around the world. A lot of people may not know that while SEMI has a global presence, their global CMO, Terry Cao, is from Taiwan. Since SEMI was founded in 1970, Terry is the very first Asian CMO in SEMI's history. He came to one of our previous sessions featuring a speaker from Intel Capital. After knowing our mission, he expressed his interest in supporting this series. I'm extremely grateful for partners like him and Joanne, Erica from his team, who are all with us here tonight. A huge thank you again, and later on, we will get through the round circle introduction, so you will get to know them a lot more. All right, without further ado, let's get into today's session. Quick housekeeping. We will first go through the fireside chat, then afterwards, Q&A with questions from you. Please be prepared to turn on your webcam so that we can foster the connections within this community. Before we end, we always have a closed-door round circle introduction with all investors in the room, during which we will invite you to share a bit about yourself, your investment focus, check size, sectors, and so on and so forth. Now, Joanne, are you ready? Would you like to say hi from Manila to our audience today?
Hi, Elisa. Hi to our friends at SEMI, Terry, Joanne, Erica. Thank you again for making this possible. It's my pleasure to join you all tonight. Thank you for taking time after dinner to hang out with us. I hope we have an interesting chat and to help answer any questions you guys might have about impact investing, corporate venturing, or Southeast Asia. So very excited for our conversation, Elisa. Thank you for inviting me.
Fantastic. And I met Joanne actually previously because I was trying to connect with, the current company that you work for, Kickstart Ventures, which is the CVC arm of Globe Telecom. We're going to get into a lot about that afterwards. But then, during our conversation, surprisingly, I find out that we actually have quite a lot of mutual friends in the impact investing space. I guess before we also get into that, would you like to first tell us a little bit about your background and upbringing, where you're from, obviously, and just a little bit of how you grew up to what you're doing now today?
Sure, absolutely. I will try to keep it short and not overshare as I tend to do. But hi, everyone. So my name is Joanne. It's spelled Joan, but pronounced Joanne. I was born and raised here in the Philippines. I studied here, went to university here, actually got a scholarship to go to university. And I felt that really changed the trajectory of my life, that kind of luck. And I think a lot of my career has been about how to pass on that luck to other people and open kind of doors and opportunities for others. After university, I went and did a short stint in investment banking. So I started my career there. And then kind of found my way in 2009 to LGT Venture Philanthropy, which is kind of where I spent most of 6 years. Then did a short stint in the Philippine government. And since 2016, I've been with Kickstart Ventures. So very much looking forward to speaking about kind of all those experiences and more.
Thank you, Joanne. And we're going to get into each part of that. So let's start from, well, the I word, impact investing. I remember, just recently, I guess, like chatting with a friend from Silicon Valley who actually works for the venture fund under Omedia Network, which is founded by the founder of eBay. And I remember I first got into this whole impact investing space in about 2013. And all the way, I guess, trying different things from the more nonprofit side to the very kind of like financial driven investment side of different kind of like spectrum. But first of all, for someone who has not been very familiar with impact investing or who hasn't really worked much in this space, how would you define or how would you introduce what impact investing is for someone?
Absolutely. So I guess to put it very succinctly, for me, impact investing is really just about investing with a mission to achieve some positive social impact. So that's kind of the one line, right? It's like you want to deploy your capital in a way that achieves a certain social mission. Perhaps you see a problem in the world, whether it's unequal access to healthcare, unequal access to education or housing, and you try to deploy your capital into companies that try to alleviate or solve those problems. But as you and I have discussed, Elisa, that can be like a real spectrum, right? You can kind of go from things that are kind of not so money making, let's put it this way, to things that are kind of very much in line with market returns. And I think that's the second thing kind of that I would stress about impact investing is that at the heart of it, I think it's very simple that you have this mission to create impact. But in achieving that, the how, there's a real kind of spectrum. I have not presentation, but just a slide that illustrates that. If that'll help the audience.
Sure. Yeah, please go ahead. And maybe, while you share the screen, I think it can also be interesting for us to also know a little bit more about LGT Venture Philanthropy, the company that you worked with, I think for 5-6 years back then, especially for Southeast Asia.
So as I mentioned, investors and companies can sit along this spectrum of being more finance first or impact first. And as you can see, kind of where I work, a group called LGT Venture Philanthropy, we were really looking for companies that were improving the quality of life of less advantaged people. So we were looking at opportunities in Africa, in India, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, where I was based, and China. In the spaces of education, healthcare, agriculture, ICT, and a few others. And here you can see kind of in terms of the target return, whereas traditional philanthropy is, if you are hungry, I give you, right, some money, $1, so that you can buy a meal, and I don't expect that back. Venture philanthropy is kind of somewhere in the middle, let's say, where I might expect not to get most of it back, or some of my investments maybe purely just a grant, but I might have, some investments that I give a working capital loan to a cooperative of women who, need to produce these baskets. They need to sell them in the market, and then at some point they can pay me back. So that's kind of an example of an investment where really you're there to help these people improve their quality of life, and you're not expecting like a huge return. Then kind of moving up, in terms of target return, there's like impact investing, which is, let's say, more concessionary. Again, if a company is trying to get specific biomass technology, right, to help rural villages in India to produce power for their villages, and they need investment capital to build that up, then maybe, initially, if the market-based investors don't believe yet that, hey, this could really be something, you may seek kind of more impact or concessionary capital to help bridge that gap until a point where, you are you have a business model or a proof of concept that more market-based capital would then be willing to fund and support. And then, of course, we have kind of, this emerging and growing field of sustainable and responsible investing, the space of kind of ESG, and, Lisa, you and I can talk about that more later. And, kind of finally, like just what is, known as kind of traditional investing, where, what we're after is really kind of competitive returns. There's like, a good market for it, etc. So this is one framework. There are many similar frameworks that have been developed, but hopefully this gives, our audience just some idea of the universe of impact investing. Okay, I will stop my lecture now.
Thank you so much. I think that's really helpful because, like, especially with this spectrum, with, one end with impact first, the other one is like more return or financial kind of like driven first. I think, there's probably a parallel in your current work with CVC. A lot of time is like strategic return or financial return. I guess, like you're always struggling in between those two ends. And I remember when I was chatting with you, I think one story or one thing that you mentioned really impressed me. You mentioned that not every business is built to scale. And, I would love to actually hear a little bit more around that, especially with maybe cases that you have worked with before, and why maybe not all business should be chasing the venture-backed kind of investors or that type of return. Can you just share a little bit with us around that?
No, thanks for that question. It's something that, I feel really passionate about. Like, as you guys know now, like, I spent 6 years in that space supporting early stage social enterprises, people that really wanted to make a difference in, the lives of the poor, the less advantaged, whether they were farmers or stay-at-home moms. And, I think the mistake that, if I can be so bold as to call it a mistake, right? But, often impact investors, especially before, would try to give capital to these small and beautiful businesses to try to get them to scale up, in a big way. But as Elisa was saying, not every business is built to do that. One of my new favorite examples, which I'll share with you guys, is, there's a beautiful company here in the Philippines called InvestEd, and InvestEd provides loans to college students. Usually, they are third or fourth year college students, and allows them to pay for their tuition so that they can complete their studies, and then they pay that loan back after they've graduated. And for these students who perhaps are already halfway through college, and then maybe their parents whatever, lost their jobs, or they just need like additional money to buy a laptop, whatever, then InvestEd comes in and provides that capital. I think to date, they've assisted and supported about 1,000 students so far to graduate from college, and it's a really wonderful business. I would contrast that with us, like and I won't, there's no like specific student loan tech company that I have in mind, but you know, we've invested in lending companies before, the tech-enabled lending companies, right? And if you were to build a tech-enabled lending company, you would take, I would imagine, a very different approach, right? You would lend to as many people as you could. Maybe you would raise $10 million and you would lend to like 10,000 students, and then you would kind of expect, right, like some percent of that 10,000 like wouldn't pay you back. But that's okay because that data just like feeds into your algorithm and that will help you like lend to more later, right? So that's kind of trying to build a scalable business, and like the individuals who end up not paying, well, then they just kind of, you know, would fall by the wayside, right? Like they're a statistic that helped your algorithm develop. Whereas I would imagine that in the case of a business like InvestEd, you know, if one of those 1,000 students didn't repay, they would probably be calling them and being like, hey, you know, what's wrong? Like, how can we help? Right. So I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I'm saying that the approach that two businesses addressing kind of the same problem but in different ways, the approach would differ, and therefore the kind of capital that those two kinds of business addressing the same problem would also be different. The expectations of those two businesses should be different.
Yeah, and I remember you mentioned that I think, you know, like especially the founder of this company or social enterprise, she knows every individual student that they help with. And for her, not a single person is like a rounding error. And I just feel like that's so beautifully sort of like said, because I guess in the venture back world, very often, you know, we want to see that hockey stick growth. There's no like
Exactly.
you are pushed by your investors and the next round of investors, and you are basically forced to grow, to scale. And I think it's probably good to pause and to think a little bit in terms of, hey, you know, like what kind of founder do I want to be in terms of, you know,
What kind of business do you
personality, business, the relationship that you want to build with your users or your clients and so on and so forth. And I love that story. And I think I have come across actually a lot of, especially, you know, like young, great, ambitious professionals who are very passionate about, or like who really love this idea of impact investing. When I first heard about this from 2013, I was also like, oh my God, this is like the perfect world, right? Like I get to, well, I think that I got to still make money through investment, but at the same time doing good and creating impact. So I have come across actually a lot of people asking, hey, how do I get into this world? And, you know, like, where do we even start? And obviously, I basically decided to get my hands dirty and just kind of like get into either venture philanthropy or nonprofit, or, you know, later on different kind of impact investing organizations to really help out, and then just to get my sense of how I feel about this and where do I want to sit along that spectrum. But then I'm curious in terms of back then when you were working for LGT, can you share a little bit in terms of actually what did you do, you know, like from the outside? Can you kind of like share a little bit? Is it as rosy and romantic as what people think in terms of, wow, you know, every day you're creating, you're doing good? And what would you say for people who might want to get into this space?
Absolutely. Well, I wouldn't say every day was a bed of roses, but I think that certainly every day I was in conversations with people who were very sincere about wanting to change like the world in some way and make it better in some way. So that was definitely one of the nice parts of the job, I think, is that, you know, I was often in conversations with people who are very passionate about solving some kind of social issue. I was covering Southeast Asia for LGT, as I mentioned. I was based out of Manila, but I was traveling around to Indonesia, to Vietnam, to Thailand, meeting with founders. You know, sometimes I would take a trip and then, like, you know, meet like 20, 30 founders. I usually, like, I would be on a lot of calls trying to like get introduced to founders through like investors and other nonprofits. So it's not too different, I would say, from probably what we do now, like kind of in like traditional venture, which is really, it's a lot of like meeting people, talking to people, trying to understand what they're doing, and seeing if that's like a fit with your investment mandate. So that probably like took maybe like 50% of my time. And then we were very hands-on with our portfolio companies then. So we invested in a company in the Philippines called Rags to Riches. That was my first investment at LGT. I was kind of, really working with them on kind of the operations team for some time. Then later on moved to like kind of just attending board meetings, but really just kind of tracking their progress, seeing how I could help. That's a kind of another big part of the job. And then I guess the balance of the time is really spent kind of on preparing like investment memos, and reporting to our investment committee. So all in all, like it was a really cool job, I thought. Because LGT had like a global network, we were small. We were only 30 people probably, but from all over the world. So it was really kind of great exposure to see what was going on, what were the issues that other regions were facing, and seeing how often it's quite similar, right? Many of the regions that I talked about are kind of emerging middle class kind of regions, and so the problems are kind of all the same, the inequality and stuff. For folks that want to get into impact investing, in many ways I think it's a lot like venture again, meaning it's actually a pretty small world. That's why, Elisa, you and I have so many friends in common, right? Like, it's a small world. People know each other, and it's also kind of very generally, I think, quite open and helpful. So to the extent that there are events similar to this one that are hosted by kind of impact investors in the region, or accelerators, it's good to attend those. Just reach out, have calls. I had a lot of calls with people back when I was in impact investing, and even now with people who are just interested about it, curious about it. I think you'll find that people are very willing to give an hour of their time just to talk about it, connect you to other people. And that's, I think, yeah, like really powerful and the best way to like get networked anywhere. Yeah.
And what's your view in terms of, I guess you have left for how many years, like 6 years or so?
6 years, yeah, but no, maybe a bit more. I left in 2015. Yeah, 6 years. 6 years.
Yeah, and like I sometimes when I recall back then in 2013 when I first stumbled into this whole new brave world, I thought, wow, like the whole world is doing this, and I think very quickly we're gonna see this all over Taiwan, and like a lot of people are gonna talk about this. But still, I think like at least from what I see in my world, I think things are actually moving along a little bit slower than what I originally have expected. Well, at the same time, I'm also seeing quite a lot of maybe greenwash or whitewash or impact wash. That's why this whole impact word is kind of loaded. What's your view in terms of the current landscape? Especially I guess in Southeast Asia, some people that I met in the impact space become kind of jaded because they kind of feel like they're surrounded by all of these people who talk impact all day long, but like how about the actual things to be accomplished? What's your like in terms of just then versus now, or like for me, frankly, a lot of time I don't really specify that I'm doing something impactful anymore or ESG. I kind of feel like that should get embedded in whatever we're doing anyway. So curious about your sort of like evolution with your journey from then till now.
No, it's a great question. I think kind of there was a time, right? I think if you were there in 2010, 11, 12, you thought impact investing was going to take over the world, right? Like kind of that was the feeling. I think what has happened is that there's been a convergence maybe with the tech space. So with what I do every day, it doesn't feel too far from what I was doing in the impact space. So I think tech has been a great enabler on the impact side. I'll give some examples. And also even kind of because there's been an emerging middle class in many of kind of the developing kind of regions that we were addressing, we've actually seen the entrance of market-based capital. So exactly what I was saying earlier, if you guys remember that graph, is that that's the point sometimes. The impact investing gets the models up to a point where the market then is ready to fund them. And so even if it didn't, let's say, explode impact investing in itself, I was saying this to someone just this morning, that sometimes we take too short-term a view, right? You're like, oh, my impact investment didn't succeed, so impact investing wasn't successful. But maybe what that impact investment enabled was the entrance of market-based capital, that then enabled that clinic chain, that one clinic that you funded suddenly, like got investment from a private equity fund, and that clinic chain expanded. You know what I mean? That school expanded. So I think that there's been some entry of market-based capital to solve some of those problems that initially social capital or impact capital was trying to solve, which I think is a great development. I would say also the other thing is how tech has enabled impact. So I'll give you a great example. In 2012, I was in Indonesia for an accelerator program that I had launched with my previous company. And I was about to leave, so I didn't get to meet this company, but a friend of mine was saying, hey, Joanne, like, I just met this company. They're a social enterprise. He said they're a social enterprise, and they are trying to help Gojek drivers. These are the motorcycle independent guys. They're trying to get Gojek drivers a platform so that they can book jobs. And that social enterprise in 2012 was Gojek, which raised a Series A round, right, in 2015 or 16, and is now like, a unicorn multiple times over, right? But it started as a social enterprise, which I think is so interesting, right? So there are a lot of problems that social entrepreneurs back in 2009, 10, 11, 12, were trying to solve. Access to market, access to education, access to healthcare, right? That before technology arrived, before mobile phones, ubiquitous connectivity, before those things arrived, you had to build this social enterprise. It was this painstaking effort. You had to go down to the communities, you had to talk to them, you had to get their names, but now it's like everybody signs up for the app, right? And like, it's so there has been, I think, this blurring to some extent of kind of the lines between, what would have been considered an impact enterprise before and what is kind of a venture-backed startup today.
Wow, what a great story. I didn't realize that Gojek back then started as a social enterprise. What a story, man. I think that's also a great inspiration for a lot of people, because I think my observation, at least in Taiwan, and probably to a large extent, at least back then in Hong Kong, I think a lot of time social enterprise is very non-profit driven. So I think, like a lot of the great people in that sector probably have a much deeper non-profit background. So that's why it didn't tend to be very market driven. But as you said, I think technology and also just like a lot of this maybe other market driven, but maybe patient capital slowly is closing that gap in terms of enabling a lot of this, like entrepreneurs to really solve a lot more issues and questions. We have some impact investing related folks in the room. So later on, I look forward to your questions during the Q&A session for Joanne, and also curious in terms of hearing your experience later on during the round circle introduction as well. With that, I want to kind of like move into your next phase. In between this and what you're doing now with Kickstart Ventures, you went to work with the Ministry of Trade, I believe, and working with small medium enterprises in the Philippines. What did that happen, and why did you make that choice? What did you learn, by the way, doing that?
I know, right? No, so why I moved into government is a very personal reason, actually. So In 2013, I was, in my job at LGT. I was very happy. But I don't know if you guys remember this. There was a very big typhoon that hit the Philippines in 2013. It was called Typhoon Yolanda. And it caused massive damage. There was this huge tsunami. It wiped out like entire villages, like thousands of people died, billions of dollars in destroyed kind of capital and property. So, it was a big tragedy for the country at the time. And I had a lot of friends in government, young, idealistic people who had joined the administration then. And I thought they weren't sleeping. They were working very hard to try to, restore connectivity, electricity, get relief goods down to all the cities. But of course, you go on social media, and the criticism of the government is so loud, right? Like, oh, our government's so corrupt. Oh, our government's not doing anything for us. Like, oh, it's so bad, right? And as I was maybe 28 at the time, and I thought to myself, like, hey, how come it's like that, right? Like, how come my friends are working so hard, but then like the outcry of the public is so loud, like, they're complaining so much. So at that point, it took me still a year to make the transition, but I feel at that point I felt like I want to know what it's like. I want to go in there and I want to try, because if I'm ever going to criticize my own government, I want to understand like the challenges that kind of, people in government face, right? And there's, at least I felt, no way to do that unless you're actually in it. And I guess part of it also was, trying to see how to create impact. I was exploring personally, like the different ways that I could do that. So I had done it for 6 years, investing in social enterprises, and I wanted to explore what it might be like to create impact on the government and policy side. So that was kind of what brought me to government.
Wow, if you were to name one thing, I really admire that, by the way. Just, if you want to complain about something, get your hands dirty and roll up your sleeve and do something first, so that you earn the right to really complain. And I think that's, yeah, probably like a lot of people probably just use their mouth, and then but you actually went on to do something. So really admire that. What would you say, if you were to name one thing that you learned from that experience with the government?
I'm gonna give you a 3-for-1 deal. Because this is really what I say to anyone who joins government, and I feel like it's, these 3 things are at least if anyone's thinking about it, especially if you're kind of younger, I would say number 1, join at kind of the start or closer to the beginning of an administration, because at the start of an administration, it's a new page. Everybody has a lot of energy. They want to like get things done. I joined towards the end of the administration, and at that point, people are preparing to exit the building because a new administration is coming. So kind of you have to go a little bit when the momentum is there. The second point is, as much as possible, don't go in alone. Go in with a team. Go where you will work with people who will encourage you, who will pick you up when you've had a bad day, when your project wasn't approved, or when, so-and-so, high-ranking official blocked your proposal, it's a long game. And when you're doing it by yourself, it can be easy to get discouraged. So try to go in with a team. And then third, I think in government, but actually anywhere where you're trying to achieve large things, you kind of have to measure your progress, in my view, in years and decades, not months. When you're trying to change government policy, when you are trying to change, just how the government approaches like industry development, that is not a 1 month thing. It's maybe not even a 1 year thing, right? Like you have to have constant conversations, talk to people, get them over the line. And you will see those results, but the big worthwhile things sometimes take a lot of time.
I think that's really a very important reminder, because very often we get all passionate and idealistic about, hey, we want to change the world. And it's kind of like, okay, 3 months in, things didn't happen.
I give up.
And we're like, enough is enough. So, but I think that's a great reminder. I think important, and also very substantial changes really require a lot of time and patience. And I think only with that can you create really the biggest change that we need to see in the world. So, well, great lesson, very important. I guess, with that, then you basically took all of that and you're learning with LGT from the impact side into your current fund, Kickstart Ventures. Some of our friends have already heard a little bit from you, especially during that great Q&A session that you did with us at Asia Venturing. And by the way, we will put the video afterwards if you want to check that out. But for people who are not so familiar with Kickstart Ventures yet, can you tell us just first a little bit about what it's all about? And then we're going to get into how you ended up getting there and what you're up to this day.
All right, awesome. So Kickstart Ventures is a corporate venture capital firm. We are affiliated first and foremost with Globe Telecom, which is the leading telco here in the Philippines. We were started in 2012 to kickstart the Philippine startup ecosystem. I have a great story, Elisa, about kind of just how things take time and how you measure impact over a decade. But anyway, we can get into that later. Founded in 2012, started really by investing in earlier stage startups in the country, because at the time we did not have a mature startup ecosystem. And so I feel like, a lot of our investments at the time were, yes, in companies, but also in the founders themselves. It was like tuition fee for the founders to learn how to be founders, right? Then in 2015, we pivoted or expanded our mandate to do kind of more corporate venture capital, started deploying larger checks into more mature companies in the Philippines, but also abroad. So we have investments across Southeast Asia, in the US, in Israel, in Canada. Then last year, in 2020, the, let's say, mother company of Globe, which is Ayala Corporation. So Ayala Corporation, for our friends who are not aware, is the oldest business conglomerate or business house in the Philippines. We are quite diversified across property, banking, telecommunications, energy, industrials, automotive, healthcare, and a variety of other industries. And Ayala, having seen kind of the work that we had done at Kickstart for Globe and corporate venture capital, tapped us to manage Ayala's corporate venture initiative, which is called the Active Fund. So today, we manage the $180 million Active Fund, in addition to roughly $60 million also in capital from Globe, so almost $250 million across Globe and Ayala, to deploy into companies that, for me, kind of show or demonstrate a future that we see or we want to create for the Philippines, for our region. We invest in these companies and we try to see how the platform and assets of the Ayala Group, whether it's our property division or bank or our telco, can help that technology kind of enter the market, reach consumers, and like kind of improve in the long run, like quality of life in the country. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell what we do. Uh, and yeah, maybe I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, and you joined when they closed their second fund. I remember,
right.
like around 2015. So what
Yeah.
happened with the government, and how did you end up here?
So I left. So I joined government in March of 2015. It was a short-lived stint, I must admit, guys. I decided to leave by December of 2015. This was also 6 months before the elections, which were held May 2016, I believe. And as I said, kind of the momentum was dying down on many of the projects. And I just kind of felt like I had given it a try, but it wasn't for me. And honestly, I thought I was gonna go to school at that point. But one day, I got a call from Minette Navarrete, who's the president of Kickstart, and she asked me what I was doing, and I said, well, not much. I might go to school, and she said, hey, can I can I drop by your house and chat? And I had just kind of moved houses that a month before, and one afternoon, might have been a Tuesday, like Minette arrived, and we were sitting in my living room, and my dining room, and the furniture wasn't really all complete. I think Minette might be here, but anyway, hello. And she was like, do you want to come help out for a while? We just kind of raised this fund last year. We need additional kind of manpower to like help screen investments and stuff. And I said, sure. I mean, I don't have a venture background, but if you want to like take a chance on me, right? She also took a chance. And so I started with them in March of 2016, and the story goes, I've been helping out ever since. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that story, by the way. So Minette is indeed in the room, and later on we're gonna meet her. And by the way, she was wonderful also in our Asia venturing session. So check that out if you haven't watched that yet. And I remember when you first told the story, I was like, what? She asked whether she could come, and she went to your home. I was like, is that typical in the Philippines? And I guess that shows how a leader, like when they really want to recruit talent, the extent they will go just to hunt you down, to ensure that, hey, I really want you to join the team. And I really, really was so inspired by that. And I guess, like she did the right thing, because look at what you have also helped build right now and become the vice president at Kickstart Ventures. Can you tell us a little bit in terms of say, for example, maybe a couple of investments that really got you excited, areas that you're looking at, especially now with the third this active fund, the investment scope and the check sizes could be much, much bigger. So curious in terms of just kind of on the investment side, and as we have a room of investors here, I think it will be also interesting for them to learn about potential areas to either co-invest or to collaborate.
Absolutely. I guess I want to say, like, first of all, like, that it's really been super exciting, like from when I joined to where we are today. The Philippine startup ecosystem has gotten a lot more like vibrant and exciting over time, especially I think over the last 3 years. I always like to say now the Filipino digital consumer has arrived. And what I mean by that is, I would say in 2016, 17, 18, more of our investments at that time were kind of more enterprise oriented. Whether it was SaaS or like enterprise solutions you were selling. And that was because you couldn't yet build, in my view, a solid B2C business. It would take too long because you didn't have a critical mass of digital consumers online and transacting. So it was really tough to build a B2C business. Over the past 3 years, I've seen kind of massive acceleration on that front. And so a lot of the businesses, that we've been investing in recently, especially in the Philippines, have been catering or addressing like that B2C market opportunity. So I guess like to start off, an investment that we made in kind of March of last year is a company called Kumu. Kumu is a live streaming platform, probably the leading local social media platform. And what they are is basically, the social media, and people kind of go and they post or they do live streaming, so more long form content, not like TikTok, which is kind of more like 30 seconds, like clip. But this one is like they're there for like usually an hour or so. They're singing, they're dancing, they're doing magic tricks, they're doing comedy, like all sorts of things, right? And people can tune in. They can give digital gifts to the performer or the speaker. And since we invested, we've just seen like absolutely massive growth. I mean, like just huge growth in revenue, huge growth in users. And I think that's driven both by domestic content creation, and more people like looking for entertainment, especially during COVID. But also something that surprised us is, I don't know if you guys know this about the Philippines, but there are about 10 million Filipinos who don't live in our country, right? Like, perhaps the joke is that one of our largest exports is people, right? Like maybe some of you have met like a Filipino nurse or, Filipino, usually we work in hospitality or like, maritime industry sort of thing. Anyway, so there's a huge overseas Filipino population, and they want to feel connected to their home. And one of the best ways to do that is by tuning in to Kumu, and just listening to people talk about like what's going on locally, singing the latest songs, whatever, dancing, and it's a slice of home for them. And there's a huge market opportunity actually that we discovered in this investment through that. Apart from content, I think which is a rich area, for Philippines. I think also e-commerce is taking off. And of course, you have the typical platforms, Lazada, Shopee, are very big. But what we are also seeing is the emergence of more vertical e-commerce, so more niche. So now, like, okay, you have like, kind of the Walmart, they have everything type. But now more people are ready. It's like that, right? It's like first you have everything store, and then now people are like, no, but I want something that's just for like this specific thing. So we recently invested in a mother and baby e-commerce play called Edamama. It's a play on edamama. But anyway, so we're quite excited about them. Again, we just made the investment earlier this year, but the revenues and just the traction of that platform, users have grown like tremendously. So we've also been kind of very excited by that. And perhaps last one, Elisa, I'm taking so much time talking about the companies, but but I hope I'm also covering, I guess, like the opportunities in the Philippines, which hopefully is helpful. But the last one is like fintech, of course, right? All across the world, so much money going into fintech. One area that's been interesting and where we have made a bet is under fintech specifically is like SME solutions. And I'll tell you why. In the Philippines, I don't know if it's like this in Taiwan. In the Philippines, if you want to open a corporate bank account, you need to provide 3 years worth of financial statements, all of your government documents, you need to have a minimum maintaining balance of like close to $20,000 just to operate this bank account. You're like, I'm a small business. I don't even have $20,000. What are you talking about, right? So what this company that we invested in does, nextpay, is they provide a simple, straightforward SME banking solution. There's no minimum balance. You can set up an account, in like a matter of minutes. You can start paying your employees. They don't all have to be in the same bank for you to pay them. You can start collecting from, your customers and invoicing, like, your suppliers. So we thought we made an early bet in this because we thought it's a interesting business and a huge opportunity. And I think these three recent investments highlight the emerging opportunities locally: content, e-commerce, SME enablement, and really catering to that emerging Filipino digital consumer.
Thank you. I have two questions related to this, and I know that we're running behind our schedule a little bit, but I really just feel like I think other investors in the room probably will also be interested. Number one, it seems like the Filipino market has becoming a very B2C driven or kind of like potential good arena for this type of businesses. When you invest, do you usually feel like if they can make it really big in the Philippines, then that's enough? Or do you think the companies that you just described, do you also need to see that they have potential to expand outside of the Philippines? Because in Taiwan, a lot of times for B2C kind of businesses, usually they're not big enough for our domestic market to really support a venture-backed business. I guess they can go for more mission-driven or patient capital type of capital, but for venture-backed, that's a very different story. So first, I'm curious in terms of for B2C, is this more domestic, or do they have to have like a regional at least play? And another thing is that you mentioned Ayala, the biggest conglomerate and oldest conglomerate in the Philippines. They have very diversified businesses from like real estate, banking, electricity, and all these other businesses. When you work on the investment, do you also scout for potential technology in the more perhaps maybe kind of like industry 4.0 or kind of like the more hardcore, quote unquote, kind of like stuff as well?
Yeah, absolutely. No, those are great questions. Okay, so wait, what was your first question?
B2C,
is
is
the
it domestic?
Philippine market, right? Okay. I think the view on that is changing.
And by the way, just to let our audience know, what's the population of the Philippines, so that in case
Oh, yes,
a little bit of a reminder.
Can I show my slides?
Please go ahead. We can jump around.
It's very show and tell tonight, guys. But don't worry, it's not a novel. So just to give everyone a sense, right? This is pulled from the Google Temasek economy study, but should give everyone a sense. So 400 million internet users in Southeast Asia, 600 million across the region, covering these 6 countries. Philippines is about 108 million people. We are the second most populous country in the region after Indonesia. And that's a great jumping off point, I think, because I was just starting to say that the view on the Philippines is changing, right? Like, I think if you had asked somebody a year or two ago, even, right, like 2 years ago, is the Philippines a big enough market? They would have probably said, maybe not, right? Like, I would like to see a regional story like soon. But as more and more digital consumers kind of come online, I think the view on that is changing. There may actually be a big enough market to sustain a company that's worth at least hundreds of millions, maybe even billions, on just the Philippine market alone. I'll give you a recent statistic. We're just kind of running our half-year numbers. So it was super kind of exciting for me to learn or just to discover, like, this first half of 2021 was the first time that we had 3 companies raise Series B rounds all at the same time. Like, usually maybe you have one company raise a Series B. You know, Philippines is not a very hectic venture market, but this year, 3 companies all raised Series B. Kumu, um, Great Deals, which is an e-commerce play, and I've completely spaced on the third one. I am so sorry. But there was a third company that raised Series B. We're gonna fill it in later, Elisa. But yeah, so I think there is kind of a big enough opportunity. This is again from the study, right? Especially accelerated by COVID. You see kind of, this year, 36% of consumers in Southeast Asia just started using digital services, and 94% of them are going to stay, right? So, I think a huge market, $100 billion, 300 billion expected by 2025. I think there's pretty good opportunity. On your kind of other question about Ayala, and thanks again for that. While I talked about kind of the Philippine market opportunity, and certainly those spaces that I mentioned, content, e-commerce, logistics, our fintech are all areas where we are keen to invest in opportunities. We are also looking at kind of technologies that as Elisa was saying, support and enhance the businesses, the other businesses of the group. So for example, we have a growing healthcare platform called AC Health, which has a network of clinics, a network of pharmacies, hospitals that we are building, and a digital telehealth layer that kind of we're designing on top of that, right? So definitely health tech is an area where we would like to explore like solutions and make investments, things that make healthcare more affordable and accessible. I've seen things like portable radiology, like X-ray machines, right? Things that enable you to bring healthcare closer to the last mile. I think are super interesting. Apart from this, AC Industrials also kind of produces kind of semiconductors, especially for the automotive space. So we are keen, and folks at SEMI, to explore kind of more opportunities kind of in that space. So automotive, we're looking at ADAS systems, like autonomous driving solutions, are definitely kind of areas that we do look at opportunities in. We have the goal of becoming kind of the largest regional producer of renewable energy through AC Energy. And towards that, I think it would be great to find more solutions in energy storage, so that the energy that we produce when it's sunny, right, or when the wind is blowing, we can store and actually move the country towards more renewable forms of energy. So yeah, like definitely like would love to speak with anyone here who is looking at those spaces. Would love to co-invest. But Grocery, thank you, Minette.
Yes.
Always there for the save. Grocery was the third Series B.
Oh, great. Fantastic.
Go.
And yeah, looking through just a list of people who are in the room, I think definitely from e-commerce to content to a lot of this like more industrial energy related semiconductor and energy. I think later on during the investor circle, I think there'll be a lot of interesting conversation. And by the way, folks in the room, we're gonna get into the Q&A very quickly. So get your questions ready. Start thinking about what you would like to ask Joanne, and then also get ready to turn on your webcam for the later part, the closed door round circle. So, yeah, finally we're getting into that part. And by the way, so before we wrap, just very quickly, I would love to actually get into a little bit of discussion around Southeast Asia, and also, you know, like in terms of what you're doing now, what do you think? Let's get to this part first. So previously, you started your career more on the impact investing side, and then afterwards, really get into the field working with the government, and now working with the corporates. So basically, kind of like really trying to balance the strategic return and financial return. What do you think previously your experience from the impact investing world made you a different, and I believe better investor now? I think, you know, like I think a couple of months ago, during a media roundtable for Ayala and Kickstart Ventures, I remember one of the journalists even asked, hey, you know, like, what's your strategy for ESG, or whether you have any particular investment mandate around that? And I remember I was very impressed and also surprised to a certain extent, because ESG is becoming, I guess, you know, like a buzzword here in Taiwan, but I'm not really seeing a lot of emphasis or mentioning for early stage funds yet. And so I'm very curious in terms of kind of like the two worlds of yours, convergence, and what do you think, you know, like either technically or just kind of like in terms of mentality and everything, what has that kind of like affect you?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's the great note to end things with. Then I really want to hear from everyone else. You know, I think we have a saying at Kickstart, you know, people make the difference. And, you know, I feel like while what I do now is, let's say, more commercial oriented, market-based, market-driven, I wouldn't have joined and I wouldn't have stayed, right, if the values weren't there. And, you know, towards that, I mean, kind of, you know, in terms of integrity and how we deal with people, right? I think, you know, in all my jobs, and especially like, you know, in social enterprise, like that's so personal, right? These are people like advocacies, they care so much. And I've always believed that, you know, when you talk to an entrepreneur, they've poured their whole selves into it. And so you have to honor that, right? So I'd always try to come with kind of authenticity and sincerity. I listen and really try to understand why they're doing it. And that, I think, hasn't changed, you know, kind of from when I was talking to social entrepreneurs to when I talk to founders. I say, you know, to my team today, like founders, right, especially like the successful ones, like, you know, they have their choice of investors. They're talking to so many, right? But I think what we can do, right, is to really listen to them, to not come in and feel like sound like we have all the answers, but really try to understand where they're coming from, their business model, why they're approaching it that way. And so I think that curiosity, that humility, that authenticity is kind of something I've taken with me from my impact days, but something that I think also is very much reflected in the values of Kickstart. So I think that's kind of one thing. You know, we talked about kind of the long-term view. This is a great time to tell this story. You know, I was just talking about it with Minette and Dan, who co-founded Kickstart in 2012. You know, when Kickstart started, as mentioned to you guys, we were investing in early stage companies, right? And many of those early stage companies, especially from the first couple of years, like they failed. They're no longer around. And if you take a short-term view as an early stage investor, you can be like, oh, wow, you guys really suck. Like you guys really failed. Like, the companies that you invested in didn't work out, right? But when I look back, like many of those founders, the team members, in those early days of the Philippine startup ecosystem, they've gone on to start other companies. They've gone on to be part of other founding teams, and they've taken those lessons from the early days and reinvested them, right, into their startups, hopefully some of which we've invested in. But so I guess the point is, like, if you're lucky enough, right, to be able to take a long-term view, you can actually see the impact that investments that we made back in the early 2010s like have on the ecosystem today, and that's, I think, been super gratifying. Yeah, for me, I'll end there.
Yeah, I think I'm hearing just like a lot of empathy and compassion. I guess, like, even though you're sitting on the other side of the table from the buy side, but I think having that really, really humble attitude to, like, treat every founder that you meet with respect. I remember that usually you don't take, the meetings that you take usually last for like 1 hour, because you don't believe that if you just meet them for like 15, 30 minutes, how do you actually truly get to know someone? And I really just kind of feel like that also triggered a lot of thoughts as well that I have. And I'm curious, I'm going to survey the people in the room later in terms of the length of the meetings that you take for, say, for example, companies that you might invest into, to kind of like get a sense in terms of the situation in the room. And with that, we're going to get ready to open the floor with questions. I know that we still haven't got to cover so many great things that I think Joan can share with us, but because of time, we're going to first open the floor, and hopefully we'll be able to maybe cover some of the questions during Q&A, and perhaps even more during the afterwards the closed door session. So now I would like to invite everyone in the room to turn on your webcam and to ask your question. So basically the way it works is that because we have quite a few investors here, so in the bottom, you will see this reaction icon, and you can basically raise your hand, and then you can use that function to ask your question. I'm seeing Jennifer is having a question already. We also have another question from Judy in the chat. So why don't we go with Jennifer? Would you like to go first? And I'm gonna come back to Judy. And Judy, you can also get ready to ask your question directly afterwards. For other investors, if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand, and we're gonna call you. Hopefully we'll cover all of the questions. And then afterwards, we're gonna get into the round circle. All right, Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you, Elisa. Hi, Joanne. This is Jennifer. I have so many questions, but the one, sorry, I have 2 cats with me. The one I want to ask the most is, I'm working for a apparel company to do their CVC right now. And because we've been operating in Cambodia for over 20 years. So the founding family really wants to give back to the community. So actually we plan to run a VC fund, or just a accelerator sort of thing in Cambodia. The project was delayed because of the pandemic. It should have been operated since last year, but we haven't really started right now. But this is the goal. So I just want to ask for your advice for how to start to build up a really like venture capital environment, or a startup supporting community in a country or a region that normally people consider not that startup oriented yet. How can you promote the environment and help everyone to know that they can go out and start to do innovative things? Thank you.
That's so awesome. And also, I love your hair.
Thank you.
No, I mean, listen, like that's such a great question. I almost want to like pull in Minette. But also my colleague Pia was here earlier. But really, Minette, Pia, like, are my team members who were around in the Philippines in 2012, it was a bit like that, you know. It was like tumbleweed, like, you know, like, and I think events actually are I have to say a great way to bring people who are interested together. Um uh so I remember and Minette, please feel free to chime in, but like, you know, startup weekend, right? There were a couple of events like this, and you know, folks would come and pitch their ideas. They could meet with mentors, they could meet with other founders, they could meet with people who could build their product if you were like a commercial guy and you needed to meet like a tech founder. So you know, I think what one thing, you know, that Kickstart does even until now, I believe in late 2012 or early 2013, we started an event called Raid the Fridge. And it used to use there is literally a fridge in the Kickstart office that you can raid that has beer in it, but unfortunately because of COVID nobody's been able to do that. But Raid the Fridge is probably one of the if not the longest running startup events in the country. We hold it once a month, every last Thursday of the month, for every month except December because it's Christmas and nobody comes to work in the Philippines at Christmas. But we are approaching, by October of 2021, we will have reached 100 episodes, 100 times that we've run this over 6 years. No, wrong. Over almost 10 years, right? And what we've heard from people is they've met co-founders there, they've met investors there. You know, they somebody was telling me recently they like it because they go, and even if they don't know anything, the vibe that's created, similar to like the vibe that Elisa has here, is like you can go and you can ask whatever question and they're not afraid. So it's creating those spaces where people can meet each other and can kind of like collaborate. I think is very important. And then if you have the privilege or the resources, like to also invest in companies, okay, some of it is going to be tuition fee for the founders, as I was talking about earlier, right? But that will help seed the ecosystem, and then it will help other people come in and also support, and you can build it from there. It won't take overnight, right? We've been at this for almost 10 years. We're celebrating our 10th year next year. But also the Philippine startup space has come a long way. So, you know, I think you can see that it's possible.
I love that
Yeah.
answer. Yeah. And I guess, you know, as an ecosystem builder, I can really relate to that as well. So events really is the starting point to connect people so that ideas and relationships can sort of like flourish from there. Thank you. And Judy, I see your question. Would you like to answer directly yourself? And then for all the other guests in the room, let's get ready to turn on the webcam afterwards, and so that we can get ready for our round circle. So Judy, over to you.
Hi, Joan. Thank you so much for your inspiring sharing. My question is, how do you measure impact? Because people sometimes would equate ESG with impact in investing, but somehow I feel that that's not quite the same. But how do you measure impact, and is it still a scale up, but just in different ways?
No, thanks. That's a great question. There's no like simple answer, unfortunately, because as you saw in that chart that I flashed earlier, it's a spectrum. So depending on, I guess, like the kind of business or the kind of investment, the metrics for impact will be different. So as you pointed out, like if it's a socially responsible investment, there are ESG criteria, right, that you might follow. In my time at LGT, when we were doing kind of something in between venture philanthropy and impact investment, we tracked impact metrics similar to how you would track KPIs of startups, or similar to how you would track revenue growth over time. we would agree with a company before investing what those metrics would be. So for example, if we were investing in a livelihood company, it would be the number of women who were able to get jobs. If we were investing in an agriculture company, it would be the number of farmers that this company was training and working with, and the number of hectares that they were planting, for example. So there are some guidelines and standards that can be followed. So the Global Impact Investing Network, GIN, came out with a set of metrics which are called the IRIS metrics. I'll just type it in here if you guys are kind of interested to look that up further. But basically, it's like a catalog of like all the different ways you can measure impact. Another thing that I've seen, this was a little after my time, like, so I had already left impact investing, but we're seeing it. Even corporations are using it. The UN Sustainable Development Goals, right? So I think more and more like social enterprises or impact investors are now like framing the kind of impact that they're pursuing in the lens of I'm a 1 and I'm a 3 and I'm a whatever, and then under that again you would have certain criteria. So whatever climate action, maybe you would say metric tons of CO2, right? Or life below water, like you might say metric tons of ocean plastics I've prevented from entering the sea, right? So I think the important thing is that you agree with the company that you invest in ahead of time what those are, instead of kind of being disappointed 5 years later because you didn't agree on it like at the start.
Yeah, thank you, Joanne. I think that's such a great question, because a lot of time the most important things in the world or in our life are difficult to measure or are not so easy to be quantified, and that's something that I have always sort of like struggled with back then, even though like now, as you mentioned, there are all of these different metrics, and like say for example with even accounting standard like SASB, like with B Corp, all of these different systems. But again, I still feel like sometimes it becomes almost a philosophical question, in terms of what you sort of like value more. But I guess that's a whole different discussion, and we probably need some wine for that. We're running out of time, so like unfortunately we're gonna end the first session there. So I guess like that's first, I guess, put our hands together for Joanne for her brilliant sharing, and also during the Q&A session. And for those investors online, we're gonna move into the round circle intro. So thank you again, Joanne, and